Hi, my name's Quentin. And for most of my life, I was just the brother who worked with computers. That's what they told people. That's all they ever let me be. They gave my seat to the guest of honor, put my name on the program like I was part of the catering crew, and then watched my brother steal a mission I nearly died for. But I didn't speak up. Not at first. I waited. And when the truth came out, it wasn't just my name they had to say out loud. It was everything they tried to bury. Have you ever had someone rewrite your life like you were just a footnote? Let me tell you what happened next. I arrived earlier than I needed to. Something about being late to this kind of event always felt like giving them more power than they already had. The Officers Club in San Antonio hadn't changed much since the last time I'd been dragged there. Polished floors, flags so stiff they looked starched, and the unmistakable scent of old brass and pride. It wasn't a smell you ever got used to. Not when you grew up in a house where silence was a punishment and medals were the only way to be seen. Vexley's military promotion dinner was in full prep mode. Staff moved like shadows across the room, setting wine glasses with surgical precision, arranging centerpieces like this was a wedding reception instead of a ceremony for a man who had once shoved me into a ditch at age 12 and said I needed to learn how to take a hit. The host spotted me first. "You're Marcus, right? IT support?" she said with a half-apologetic smile. I blinked once. "It's Quentin. I'm Vexley's brother." "Oh," she said, frowning down at the clipboard, then scratching something out. "Sorry about that." She pointed to my assigned seat without much more than a nod. I didn't even need to look to know where it was. It always was. Back table, closest to the swinging kitchen door and the restroom hallway, where foot traffic guaranteed I'd be stepped around more times than acknowledged. Same as it ever was. I found my place card, and sure enough, it read, Marcus, IT support. Not even the right name, let alone the right title. No one asked what I did. That was expected. The first hour was filled with the usual back slaps and mock surprise. "Quentin? Wow, it's been a while. Still in DC, huh? Must be nice not to have to get deployed." I smiled through it. These people weren't cruel. They were just lazy with their curiosity. Dinner rolled out in perfect symmetry. Salads, then entrees, then the moment they'd clearly all been waiting for, the unveiling of a commemorative plaque to honor Vexley's recent achievements. His commanding officer gave a long, well-rehearsed speech. My brother stood tall beside him, chest out like he was auditioning for a bronze statue. "And this," the officer said, lifting a glass case with a miniature replica of the base's new drone security module, "was conceptualized in part by Captain Draenor himself, who proposed the commemorative design at last year's strategic planning session." I didn't blink, but my jaw ached from clenching. That commemorative design? That was mine. I'd mocked it up months ago after a brief conversation with the event coordinator, an idea to include a symbolic gesture that showed appreciation for technical support personnel who never made it into the photos. It was meant to be anonymous, quiet, like the rest of my life. And now, here it was, credited publicly to Vexley, whose strategic planning session consisted of him seeing the mock-up on my laptop during a family visit and chuckling, "No way they'll go for that soft crap." The applause was generous. He soaked it in like sunlight. I took a sip of water so I didn't have to join in. Sienna, sitting 3 tables over, locked eyes with me briefly. She raised an eyebrow like she almost remembered the truth, then looked away. Later, I stepped out through the side exit near the back terrace. The night air was cooler than I'd expected, tinged with cedar and a faint sharpness from the nearby fountain's chlorine. I rested both hands on the railing, my back still stiff from a week of overnight shifts. My fingers tapped against the stone absently, as if there were a keyboard there. I whispered the sentence once under my breath. Not because anyone could hear, but because it was the only thing that hadn't been stolen. I wasn't even supposed to be here. He stood with that glass in his hand, like it was a sword he'd earned in battle. A thick, weighted pause followed the clink of his fork against the stem. Conversations quieted across the officers' club. Forks were set down, and all eyes turned toward my brother. Vexley lifted his champagne, smile sharp and polished. "I just want to thank everyone here tonight," he began, "especially the mentors and teammates who shaped my career. I couldn't have made it here without the incredible people around me, some of whom wear the uniform better than I do." Polite laughter, some nods. He let the room breathe. "And of course," he added, tilting his glass in my direction, "my brilliant little brother, always the smart one. I mean, sure, he hacks printers and fixes office Wi-Fi, but someone's got to keep the internet running for the rest of us warfighters, right?" A ripple of laughter rolled through the tables, polite at first, then escalating as if the joke had more meat than it did. Someone, probably a cousin, held up their phone, recording with the kind of grin that says, "This one's going viral." I smiled too, or something close to it. My hand stayed steady on my water glass, but my throat tightened with that familiar heat, years of practice helping me sit through it. That joke wasn't new. It was just better lit this time, amplified by rank and social setting. He moved on from me without missing a beat. "You know," he continued, "it's funny, this whole leadership thing, I've been chasing it since we were kids, back when we entered that robotics competition." I knew the one he meant, of course I did. He painted a picture of late nights, circuit boards, and coming in second place nationally. His voice caught a little, like it still meant something. We poured everything into it, and I remember telling my dad that if I could lead that team, maybe one day I'd lead soldiers. Guess that stuck. Laughter again. A few raised glasses. Vexley stood taller, but the story wasn't his. Not the idea, not the project, not the work. It had been mine, conceptualized, built, and presented. He'd been the team's face because he demanded it. I'd stayed in the background because that's what older brothers do when they don't want to share the stage. At least, that's what I'd told myself for years to make it sting less. From my seat, I saw Mom's expression shift. She looked down at her plate, stabbing her salad like it had offended her. She wouldn't correct him. She never had. After dinner, I slipped away again. Same side exit, same terrace. The air felt different, less cool and more metallic, as if it carried the weight of unsaid things. I leaned against the railing, palms flat against the chilled stone, and stared into the treetops. No birds this time. Just shadows swaying gently under the dim orange light. Inside, the celebration grew louder. Voices rose, music played, chairs scraped against tile. I stayed out long enough for the world to settle inside my chest. My thoughts weren't chaotic, just aligned differently, like puzzle pieces suddenly flipped right side up. I walked back in casually, shoulders square, passing Sienna on her way out of the powder room. She glanced at her phone, then up at me. "They're already sharing that clip," she said, voice lower than usual. "It's not a great look for him." I shrugged. "Wasn't meant to be." She paused, searched my face. "You okay?" I nodded, then gave her a polite smile I didn't feel, but inside, something coiled. Not in anger. Not yet. It was sharper than that. Colder. This time, I wouldn't just take it. Dessert had just started circulating. Individual tarts with 2 perfect dollops of cream and berries aligned like targets. The younger cousins, restless from the ceremony and attention on grown-up speeches, had gathered around a projector set up in the far corner of the dining hall. It was a nostalgia reel, stitched together by someone in the family who thought it would be sweet. I should have known better. A pixelated image flickered onto the screen. There was Vexley, college-aged, beer in hand, sitting in someone's dorm with two guys flanking him. The camera wobbled a bit before stabilizing. "You ever told them about your NSA gig?" one of the guys asked, half laughing. Vexley leaned back in the chair like he was James Bond off-duty. "Oh, I can't say much. Just, let's say I helped intercept a pretty major breach last fall. Middle of the night stuff. Had to reroute data traffic across half of Europe while pretending I was asleep in Virginia." He smirked at the camera. My breath caught. Those weren't his words. They were mine. Lines I'd said years ago in confidence when I was explaining to him why I couldn't make Thanksgiving. Word for word, down to the phrasing about rerouting traffic. My eyes scanned the room. Sienna had stopped chewing. Her phone lowered. Others glanced at the screen, then back at me. A few expressions twisted in thought, like gears just beginning to catch. The reel ended with a photo collage set to country pop. Nobody clapped. I didn't say anything either. I didn't need to. I had said enough to the right people, in the right ways, for the things that mattered. I picked up my water glass and took a slow sip. Across the room, Colonel Calderon stood, chatting with another officer. He glanced toward me, just a flick of the eye, and I caught it. That moment of recognition. Not of me as Quentin, the brother of the hero, but something else. After a few minutes, I walked toward the hallway near the restrooms to stretch my legs. Calderon peeled off from the group and trailed loosely behind me. We ended up near a side table, next to the doors leading out to the same terrace I'd visited earlier. He didn't greet me at first. Just reached for a glass of water and adjusted his cufflink. I did the same with mine. And that's when his gaze zeroed in. His voice dropped low. "Only 6 of those ever made it out of secure rotation," he said, nodding slightly at the watch on my wrist. It wasn't flashy, matte black with a deep blue band, but its weight wasn't cosmetic. "Still holds up," I replied simply. He studied me for a beat longer than necessary. So it wasn't just printers after all. I didn't answer. We stood there in silence. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that acknowledged the things we didn't have the clearance to say. Later that evening, I found myself back at the table as coffee was served. Across from me, someone mentioned Munich, a minor anecdote about delayed travel during a NATO conference. I remembered it instantly. It had been November. Cold enough that the chill bit through my gloves even as I typed lines of code from the back seat of a parked SUV, engine off to avoid detection. 3 service members had been flagged in a data sweep. Wrong time, wrong network. I'd burned through 8 hours of rerouting, fake identities, and secured blind tunnels to ghost them out of a breach. They were alive because I hadn't blinked. And now Vexley had turned that into a story over beer and bragging rights. Sienna leaned in from the next table, whispering to a friend. Her words weren't meant for me, but I caught them anyway. That was Quentin's story, wasn't it? Calderon sat straight in his chair, sipping quietly, his eyes fixed not on me, but on Vexley. His face didn't show judgment, just realization. And I smiled. Not the kind people give when they're trying to be nice. It was quieter, sharper. My eyes locked on Vexley. I didn't look away. Vexley moved through the room like a politician up for re-election. Handshakes, back pats, laughter just a few decibels too high. The crowd fed off him, and he fed off their admiration. I watched from my usual place, not in the spotlight, but within striking distance of the drink table, carrying on a mild conversation with Sienna and Aunt Nadine about local real estate. It was the kind of small talk people clung to when they weren't sure where to place you in the family lineup. Sienna raised a brow at something Nadine said, and I was about to respond when Vexley slid into the circle like he owned it. "Well," he boomed, Look at this gathering. You got the future of finance." He gestured to Sienna, "the queen of lakefront realty," toward Nadine, "and my favorite international man of mystery, Quentin. Don't let the quiet demeanor fool you. He's probably fixing a router right now with his mind." The chuckle he expected didn't fully land. A few polite smiles. Someone cleared their throat. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at him. I simply sipped my club soda and shifted the weight in my stance. He hated that, being ignored, especially when he'd been so sure of the punchline. I felt his gaze linger. For a second, I wondered if he'd double down. But then Calderon stepped into our peripheral, and Vexley's smirk faltered. The colonel didn't speak. He didn't have to. He just stood there, silent, sipping something amber. That presence alone was enough to tilt the air. Vexley gave one last tight smile and retreated back into the crowd with a clap on Nadine's shoulder. "You okay?" Sienna asked quietly, once he was gone. I gave her a slight nod. "You ever notice how the people who claim to be harmless usually come with the biggest warning labels?" Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Just then, a young officer, mid-20s, clean-cut, clearly new to the game, brushed past me, trying to maneuver around the table. I turned slightly to give him space, lifting my arm to adjust the collar of my shirt. The motion pulled my sleeve just enough to reveal the edge of a scar that hadn't seen daylight in years. A deep, jagged line that curved down from my shoulder blade. The cadet froze. Not dramatically, but just long enough for the pause to be noticed. His eyes met mine, and something shifted behind them. Recognition not of my face, but of what that scar meant. Sienna caught the exchange. Her expression turned thoughtful. Curious, and Calderon, he saw it too. This time he looked directly at me. Not like before. This was eye contact that held weight. I didn't look away. A beat passed. Then two. I slowly rolled my sleeve back down, smooth and deliberate. Nothing said. Everything heard. A few minutes later, I made my way toward the exit under the pretense of needing fresh air. I didn't rush. I wanted to be followed. And right on cue, Calderon emerged behind me, steps measured. We stopped near a marble column out of earshot. "That scar," he said, casual as if we were discussing a golf injury. "Only Tier 3 agents get those during recovery rotations." I didn't answer at first, just let the statement hang there like fog. Then I nodded once. He didn't press. Instead, he tapped his glass once against the stone railing and turned back toward the room. Inside, Vexley was still performing, laughing too loud, gesturing like a game show host. But now something in his movements felt tighter, less sure. His eyes followed Calderon as the colonel walked past him without a word. I stayed where I was, watching from the shadows. He was finally starting to wonder. The gravel crunched under my shoes as I made my way back to the guest house. The celebration had ended, but something in the air told me the real evening hadn't even started. I wasn't sure if it was the silence or the heaviness in my chest, but every step felt like walking into a memory I hadn't agreed to revisit. The porch light was still on. Inside, a kettle steamed faintly on the stove, and my mother, Ione, sat at the small table, a mug of chamomile in front of her. She didn't say a word when I entered. Just looked at me the way only mothers do when they know you've been holding your breath for too long. I poured myself a cup and sat across from her. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was intentional. After a moment, she reached beneath the table and pulled out a small box, familiar in shape, unfamiliar in presence. It had no label, no markings, just aged cardboard and the kind of tape that no longer stuck without help from memory. She slid it toward me. "Your father never saw this," she said softly. My fingers hesitated at the edge. What is it? I found it in the mail the week after that ceremony. The one where Vexley got his first medal. I knew if he saw it, it wouldn't survive the hour. I peeled back the flap. Inside, an envelope, weathered, edges curled. I unfolded it slowly, recognizing the federal seal partially faded but still intact. The letter was short, vague by necessity. But I understood every word. It was a commendation, from an agency that didn't issue them lightly. It referenced a date, an operation code name, and an agent identifier that wasn't a name but a designation, QX Leor. Mine. I stared at it longer than I meant to. Ione sipped her tea. You never told us where you were that fall, only that you wouldn't be home. I folded the letter, hands steady. I wasn't supposed to. Miles away, across town, another conversation happened. Colonel Calderon's phone buzzed softly during his ride back to the hotel. He glanced down. A contact from the Defense Intelligence Review Committee, a name he hadn't seen in 5 years. The message was simple. You were right. Memo attached. Starlight Echo, QX Leor, uncredited, circulating quietly. He didn't reply. He just stared at the screen, then slowly locked the phone and stared out the window. Back in the kitchen, Ione leaned forward slightly. I kept it, not because I wanted to lie to your father. I just knew the truth wouldn't change his disappointment. Silence was safer. I nodded, not in agreement, but in understanding. In this house, she continued, we never asked too many questions, especially not when something smelled like government business. You thought it would protect me, I said. She looked away. I thought it would protect all of us. We sat in quiet again. Not peace, just resignation. Later that night, I walked back into the main house. Everyone was asleep. The kitchen dimly lit by the under-cabinet lights that hummed softly, like a memory trying to be forgotten. I placed the envelope on the table. No note, no confrontation. Just one thing. I circled the date in red ink at the bottom. The same date Vexley was pinned his first medal, the one he'd worn like a second skin ever since. Then I turned off the light and left. Dinner lingered past dessert. The room hummed with small laughter and clinking forks, silver against ceramic. Wine glasses refilled themselves, and conversations drifted toward shallow waters. Football scores, housing markets, someone's new promotion at a mid-tier logistics firm. I kept to myself, observing like I always had. From the edges, things look clearer. Colonel Calderon sat across the room, posture perfectly upright, as if his spine had been trained by time and war. He wasn't drinking much, just scanning. Not the party kind of scanning, but the kind you do when the battlefield is subtle. I noticed when he stood, quiet, precise, without fanfare. He walked slowly, intentionally, not toward the head table, where Vexley sat surrounded by admirers. No, his steps lined up toward me. Vexley noticed. Of course he did. His smile widened, assuming the colonel's destination, assuming the compliment that was surely coming. But Calderon didn't stop at his table. He kept walking. Right to me. I stood without knowing why. Reflex, maybe. He halted in front of me, tall and still, the whole room beginning to hush as forks paused. Mid-air. Even the music seemed to dim. Then, with absolute crispness, Calderon came to attention and saluted me, not a lazy nod or a handshake, a full regulation salute, public, deliberate. The entire room froze. It took everyone a breath to register what they were seeing. Vexley's smile faltered. Confusion crept in. Then silence. It's an honor, sir, Calderon said. Just that, nothing more, Not loud, but loud enough. He dropped his salute with practiced ease and turned without waiting for acknowledgement. He walked back to his seat the same way he came. Steady, sure, deliberate. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the murmurs started. What just happened? Did he say, "Sir"? Wait, what does Quentin even do? I didn't move. I didn't speak. I nodded once, to no one in particular, and took my seat. My hands remained steady, my breath even. Across the room, a retired general adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, and gave the faintest nod in my direction. I returned it with the same restraint. Sienna sat at the end of her table, phone in hand, eyes wide. I watched her lift the screen and tap, record, her lips forming the softest whisper. "Oh my God." She didn't blink. The air shifted. What had been a celebration now teetered on revelation. People no longer watched Vexley. They watched me, and they watched him watch me. He looked rattled, for the first time in a long time. He shifted in his seat, posture stiff. His expression tried to recover, but it was clear. Something had changed. The hierarchy had cracked. The questions grew louder, as did the eyes. Sienna's phone buzzed on the table. Comments already began populating under the clip she posted. When the real story walks in quietly. That salute wasn't casual. Wait, is that the brother? Respect. Viral had a smell. You could feel it before you saw the numbers. Inside the room, my father sat at the far end, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. He hadn't moved, hadn't blinked from what I could tell, but his gaze was fixed. Not on Vexley, not on the colonel, on me. And this time, he didn't look away. The crowd hadn't fully dispersed when Vexley stepped out onto the patio, laughter still trailing him. I watched from the edge of the stone wall, letting the night fold around me. There was something about being near fireflies, how they glowed without permission, that made the chaos indoors feel quieter. His phone buzzed. He glanced down. The smirk on his face froze as he tapped to open the notification. The screen glowed with the header. Defense Command Internal Affairs. A subject line followed. Recognition confirmation. Embedded intel asset intercept. For a beat, he didn't move. Then, thumb scrolling, jaw tensing. Words stared back at him that were never meant for his eyes. Agent QX Lior commended for unlisted actions related to classified breach recovery. Tactical success, 0 loss of life. Attribution, Q Lior. His hands twitched, but he caught himself before the glass he was holding slipped. Slowly, he looked up and saw me already watching. I didn't blink. I didn't gloat. He pocketed the phone, gaze flicking toward Colonel Calderon standing not far away, talking to a retired general. Calderon wasn't looking at him. That was worse. Vexley re-entered the room like someone trying to relearn how to walk. Later that night, back at the guest house, I stepped through the side entrance. Ione was nowhere in sight, but I could hear the quiet hum of the dishwasher, the clink of a cup being set in the sink. Then came his voice from the hallway. "What the hell have you been doing?" I turned slowly to face him. Our father, eyes bloodshot not from drink, but from something deeper, older. Confusion laced with pride, the kind of pride men like him never know how to express without masking it in anger. I said nothing at first. He waited. I let the seconds pass before answering. Not pretending to be someone else. The silence between us widened like a canyon. He stepped forward, holding the crumpled printout, clearly forwarded from Vexley's inbox, judging by the blurred header. "You were never supposed to," he started. I cut him off, gently. "You had the right to ask," I said. "You just never did." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. That was always his pattern. Strong arms, weak words. "You think I didn't want to know?" he asked, almost pleading now. "No," I said. "I think you didn't want to be wrong about which son you built your image around." That one landed. He turned slightly, like the floor had shifted. From the hallway, Ione stood in the doorway, arms crossed. She didn't say anything. Just watched. I stepped past him. Calm. Quiet. But deliberate. At the edge of the kitchen table, he stood holding that email, knuckles white around the page. The date on it glared from the top corner, the night of Vexley's first medal ceremony. The same night I'd been shoved behind the tech booth with a name tag that read, Marcus A.V. He looked down at the date again. I didn't need to see his face. I already knew it. Ione followed me with her eyes, but didn't stop me. Didn't offer comfort. Just witnessed. Sometimes the strongest word in a house like ours is the one no one says. I left the room with my back straight. The door clicked behind me like the end of a sentence. By late afternoon, the whispers had started. You could feel them long before you heard them. Tight glances, short conversations at the end of hallways, texts that were read but never responded to. Sienna showed me one as we stood near the garden, away from the main tent. Commendation event postponed pending clarification of internal records. No name attached, no detail. But everyone knew what it meant. Inside the house, the mood had shifted. The earlier warmth now hung like damp wool. Vexley moved through the guests like he was trying to reclaim a stage that no longer existed. Conversations paused when he entered rooms. Calderon, who'd once sat beside him at family dinners, now barely nodded. Later, as the sun dipped and the after-dinner drinks came out, we gathered again, out of habit, not excitement. One of the uncles leaned forward in his seat, squinting at Vexley through half-rim glasses. "So," he said, voice casual like pulling the pin on a grenade. "What exactly did you do, son? The thing you're being awarded for?" The air went still. Vexley stammered. "Well, you know, it's complicated. Team effort, classified in nature, but I played my part." He chuckled nervously. No one joined. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I just sipped my water, letting the sound of his fumble fill the space. When he tried again, it was with forced bravado. He stood near the fireplace, glass in hand. "I just want to say," he began, "that I've always believed in service, in sacrifice. Sometimes people don't understand what it takes, what you give up when you step into certain roles." I let him finish the first paragraph. Then I spoke, calmly. "Some men build their stories. Some borrow them until they're caught." Silence. Not shocked silence. Stunned. Waited. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood it. A cousin near the back lifted her phone. On screen was the video. Calderon's salute, paused on the frame where he stood at attention before me. A neighbor muttered, "We backed the wrong horse." Someone else murmured, "I knew something didn't add up." Vexley stared at me. His mouth opened slightly, but nothing came. Then, without a word, he set his glass down and walked out of the hall. No one followed. I didn't smile. I didn't stand. I just remained where I was, anchored by a truth that no longer needed defending. The evening wound down. People peeled off, quietly, unsure of whether to offer words or just nod. Most just nodded. I waited until the last plate had been cleared, and the wine bottles were down to their dregs. Then I stood, walked slowly past the piano, past the photographs on the wall that only told half the story. My father sat by the entryway, alone. He didn't stop me. He didn't speak. I didn't look back. But I left the door open behind me. I woke before the sun. The guest house was colder than I remembered, the kind of cold that settled in when a storm had passed. but the roof still hadn't been checked. No movement from the main house, no clinking dishes, just that eerie calm that made you question whether anything from the night before had really happened. I stepped outside. The air was thick with the scent of leftover champagne and soil turned up from too many dress shoes trampling the lawn. Folded chairs leaned against one another. Flags that hadn't been properly taken down fluttered lightly in the breeze. A plastic cup of wine, still half full, balanced on the porch rail. It was like the party had tried to erase itself, but only made the evidence clearer. No one had left a note. Not a text. Not a knock at the door. Just silence. I slid my hand over the wooden railing, the same one I leaned on when I was 17, trying to hear the world through music in my earbuds instead of the voices inside. Funny how silence could grow louder with time. I stepped toward the front drive. Sienna was there, leaning on her car, arms crossed, eyes watching the horizon. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. "They saw it now," she whispered. I nodded once. She didn't ask if I was okay. That was the best thing about Sienna. She knew when questions weren't needed. A neighbor passed, walking their dog. Older man. Always had a look like he'd seen too much, but said too little. This time he tipped his cap toward me. Slower than usual. More deliberate. Vexley's car was gone. So was the shine in his name. Back inside, the kitchen was quiet. Ione sat with her usual morning tea, flipping a newspaper she wasn't reading. I poured myself a cup of coffee and joined her. A few minutes later, my father came in. He didn't look at me, just reached for the pot and refilled my mug first. It was subtle. No apology, no mention of anything. But his hand wasn't shaking. And for a man like him, that was something. We ate quietly. No one brought up last night. But the silence didn't feel defensive anymore. It felt surrendering. After breakfast, Ione stepped into the hallway and came back with a small wooden box. Worn. Familiar. "I've been meaning to give you this," she said. Inside were copies of the medal recommendation. Old photos. Ones I hadn't seen since high school. Me in the garage with a circuit board, me and Sienna before the homecoming game, one of me and Vexley, both of us smiling for real. "I kept what mattered," she said. I didn't open the box any further, just held it. I didn't need to see it all to know what was inside. A few hours later, I began to pack. No one asked me to stay. No one asked me why I was leaving. I loaded the car slowly. Every zipper felt like a door closing. I slid the wooden box under the passenger seat. Looked once more at the house. The shutters needed repainting. The roof tiles still misaligned. I didn't leave angry. I left because I no longer needed to stay. The letter came on a Tuesday, in one of those matte envelopes that looked like it had traveled by intention, not mistake. It didn't have a return address, but the seal embossed in the top corner was faintly visible, an emblem only a few eyes in the world would recognize. I didn't need a name. I'd seen that watermark once, in a basement briefing room with no windows, and a clock that never moved. I slid the envelope open slowly. Inside, a single sheet of paper, dense with language designed to say everything while technically saying nothing at all. "Operation Veilfire," it read. "Extraordinary contribution under classified parameters. Commendation issued under internal protocol Tier 7. No ceremony, no press release. Just a signature at the bottom from someone I'd once heard speak through a wall of static during a live op in Marrakesh." I didn't smile. I didn't even exhale. I folded the letter neatly, slid it into the second drawer of my desk, under a stack of tax receipts and spare passport photos. Not because I was hiding it, because that's where I kept the things I knew mattered but didn't need showing. Later that evening, I heard the ping. Not a typical email. This one was encrypted. Only a few people knew how to send it that way. Calderon. I clicked open the message. They won't say it out loud, but I will. You kept us standing. There wasn't a signature. There didn't need to be. I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Some things you keep for the days you forget why you ever did what you did. That Thursday, I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. The door creaked the same way it always had. My father stood carving a roast in the kitchen. My mother nodded once when she saw me. Half a welcome, half a warning. We ate in silence. No one mentioned the party. No one asked what I'd done or where I'd been. But when my father handed me the first slice of roast and slid the gravy boat in my direction, I noticed he didn't use the serving fork. He used his hands. There are languages and gestures that louder families never learn. The TV was on in the background, volume low, faces flickering without sound. Sienna's message popped up on my phone while I was helping my mother clear the table. They're still sharing that clip, it read. People are saying they've never seen a salute like that. I typed back, let them talk, I've said enough. Then I stared at the message. For maybe a minute, maybe more. And then I erased it. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose silence. 2 weeks passed without noise. No calls, no texts, no unexpected knocks. I spent the time walking trails near Reston, reading dog-eared books I hadn't opened in years, and watching rain roll down my windows without needing to answer anyone. The quiet wasn't empty. It was earned. Then the call came. Short. Simple. If you've got a minute, my father said, come by the house. He didn't say why. He didn't sound apologetic. He didn't have to. I told him I'd come by after lunch. The driveway was the same. The shrubs still trimmed like military haircuts. The old truck sat quiet in the carport. I stepped up to the porch and rang the bell out of habit, even though the door was always unlocked. He was already at the table when I walked in. A coffee mug in his hands. One of those navy ones with faded gold lettering and a chip on the rim. He looked up, not stern, not warm, just present. You want coffee? He asked. Sure. We didn't talk while he poured. We didn't need to. He placed the mug down in front of me, sat again, and looked me in the eye. Quentin, he said. Just that. First time he'd used my name like that, without bark, without mockery, just as it was. As I was. I may not understand what you've done, he said after a pause, but I no longer doubt you earned it. The space between us changed with that line, like a draft had been sealed shut. I didn't respond right away. I didn't want to break it by moving too fast. After a minute, he reached below the table and brought out a small, dust-covered box. The kind of box people keep in closets for decades, waiting for a moment they aren't sure will ever come. He opened it slowly. Inside was an old service medal, his. Bronze edges dulled, ribbon still perfectly folded. It was real, not a symbol, not ceremonial. It had weight. I never gave this to anyone, he said. Didn't think anyone ever matched the kind of service it stood for. I think maybe it belongs to someone who earned it their way. My hand didn't shake when I took it. Not fully, but the box lid closed slower than it needed to. He watched me for a second longer than usual, and I let him. We sat after that. Coffee between us, steam rising and curling toward the ceiling. The clock ticked somewhere in the distance. Neither of us mentioned Vexley. Neither of us brought up the party or the fallout. There wasn't a need. We were two men sitting in a space that no longer required performance. That, in itself, was rare air. Eventually I stood, gathered my coat, nodded toward the hall. He followed me to the front door. His steps didn't drag. As he opened it, he paused. Next time, he said, bring whoever you're seeing. Doesn't have to be formal, just bring them. I looked at him, and for once, he didn't look away. I will, I said, and meant it. The veterans' event was smaller than I expected. No banners, no anthems blaring, just a few rows of folding chairs under the canopy at a civic center in San Antonio. I didn't come to be honored. I came as a consultant for national security awareness, a role that required no introductions and even fewer explanations. Before the first session began, I walked up to the event director, an Army major with tired eyes and a clipboard that had seen better days. I handed him a sealed envelope and simply said, "Please read this after the second session." He nodded, curious but respectful. No questions, no assumptions. The day rolled forward quietly. Panels on cyber defense, homeland vigilance, and future threats in a connected world. Familiar jargon, thoughtful nods, polite applause. Then came the second session. When it ended, the major walked to the podium, cleared his throat. "We've received something from one of our own," he said. "To be shared now." He opened the envelope, pulled out a single sheet of paper. His eyebrows lifted as he read. "This commendation, originally classified," he began slowly, "is hereby declassified in recognition of Agent QL's protection of over 120 service members during the Starlight Echo breach." The words hit like thunder in a room built for rain. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. Applause erupted. But it wasn't the kind with cheers. It was deliberate, measured, real. I felt eyes on me, some familiar. One pair in particular, Vexley's. He sat near the rear, half-shadowed by the corner wall, his face drained of all the charm it once relied on. When the applause faded, he tried to rise, tried to speak, but silence answered first. He looked at me across the room. For once he had no grin, no smirk. Just a face that finally realized there were no more stories to borrow. I gave him a single nod, then turned and walked out. 2 weeks later, I stood at the Rest in War Memorial. The sky was gray. A breeze moved through the trees like memory. I knelt down and placed a folded flag and a plaque at the base of the monument. For those who served in silence and were never applauded, until they had to applaud themselves. I stayed there for a while, long enough to hear the wind shift, long enough to remember the ones who never got to write their own endings. As I turned to leave, I noticed a group of younger cadets standing nearby. One of them stepped forward, nervous but resolute. He raised his hand to salute. I paused, and returned it. Not for me, but for what it meant now. I didn't need them to clap. But when they finally stood, quiet, still, and facing me, that was the loudest sound I ever heard. If there's one thing I've learned through everything, it's this. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Dignity doesn't require a spotlight. And sometimes, the loudest justice comes not from revenge, but from the simple, silent act of standing your ground. I didn't need applause to know what I was worth. But when truth finally walks into the room, even the ones who never clapped will be forced to listen. To anyone out there who's ever felt overlooked, used, or rewritten, don't spend your life trying to convince people who never intended to see you. Your worth doesn't need their approval to exist. And maybe, just maybe, your silence has more power than you think. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a moment where you realized your value didn't depend on someone else's opinion? Drop a 1 in the comments if this story spoke to you, or tell me where you're watching from. And if you didn't like the video, tell me why. What would have made it hit closer to home? If this story meant something to you, if it stayed with you after the screen went dark, please consider subscribing to the channel. We've got more stories on the way, real ones, quiet ones, and sometimes the kind that stay with you long after the noise is gone. Thank you for being here.